Faultlines viewers, I'm Gauri Dwivedi. This week on the show, we get you details of Donald Trump's 1 year in office. The peace president says he ended many wars. But on Faultlines, we tell you the number of strikes that President Trump ordered, 600 and counting. The next story on the show this week, you have your Chinese surveillance drones entering Taiwanese airspace. 2027 is a stated objective of China to invade Taiwan. Why it's going to be difficult and why the Taiwanese airspace may be invaded upon, but the invasion may not happen. Those details on Faultlines this week. This week's Faultlines viewers comes as Donald Trump completed a year in office. The president who calls himself a peacemaker. Donald Trump's second term has been defined by a paradox. Wars he says he stopped and the strikes he ordered anyway. Take the Middle East or Latin America or even Africa. American firepower has only expanded, even as President counts ceasefires like trophies. All of it unfolding alongside a very public fixation with the Nobel Peace Prize. We will map out the countries that have been attacked under Donald Trump's second term, the numbers behind the bombs that he has put forth, and the question that's echoing far beyond Washington. Is Donald Trump's supposed pursuit of peace actually fueling more conflict? Let's first listen into what Donald Trump said in Davos, and then we tell you the number of strikes that he's ordered across the world.
We ask for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. We wiped out the Iran nuclear threat like nobody can believe. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. That, Venezuela, taking down Soleimani, wiping out al-Baghdadi when he tried to reinstitute ISIS. We did a lot. I did a lot of big things, all perfectly executed. Everyone was perfectly executed. Somebody told me that, a military expert told me, sir, everything you've done has been perfectly executed. I said, I know.
So he's not going to use force, but let me now walk you through the countries that US has actually attacked with the use of force in the last 1 year. First and foremost, Iran. The nuclear strikes that came in and the nuclear sites that he had actually hit out in June 2025. There were 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Natanz, Isfahan and Fordo. The operation marked the largest direct American attack on Iranian nuclear infrastructure in history, in the hope that Iranians have since abandoned their nuclear bomb. The next big strike that took place under Trump's second term, and that is Yemen, where Operation Rough Rider came into being in January 2025 and targeted Houthi positions across Yemen, citing Red Sea shipping threats. 150 strike missions in 6 months, and that sharply escalated American involvement. Let's now take a look at what happened in Latin America. Venezuela. Maduro was captured in early 2026. American forces launched a major strike operation, culminating in the capture of Nicolas Maduro. It was the first American military intervention inside Venezuela in decades. That didn't end there. Let's now tell you what happened in Syria. There were retaliatory strikes that came in from America after attacks on American personnel, both in military as well as civilian. These were stationed in the region, and multiple precision strikes followed, reinforcing a long-running American military footprint in the region. Next up was Iraq, where ISIS targets were bombed. Airstrikes continued across ISIS remnants in northern Iraq. Military briefings, in fact, showed that dozens of confirmed targets were hit as part of counter-terror ops. That's what they're being called. Now let's look at Somalia. There was an air campaign that extended there and was expanded as US Africa Command intensified its strikes against militant groups throughout 2025. The number in terms of the strikes, it actually totals the highest since American involvement actually began. Let's now talk about Africa, where in Nigeria, counter-terror bombing took place in December last year. Extremist groups were targeted that supported regional allies. The strikes expanded America's counter-terror footprint across Western Africa. This is what Donald Trump has done, even as he continues to covet the nuclear peace prize. Now, the peace prize that he covets from Nobel. Now, more than 600 air and drone strikes globally in a single year, even as the president claims to have stopped 8 wars. Donald Trump has repeatedly called it peace through strength. But let's be clear, here is a president who has broken the rules-based order, abandoned allies, and threatened annexation against NATO powers. But for his MAGA base, he's a man who's ended 8 wars. And this report tells you what really is it that happened there.
In other words, I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump returned to office, calling himself a peace president. And ever since, he's claimed credit for ending 8 global conflicts, from the Middle East to South Asia to Eastern Europe. A ceasefire between Iran and Hamas in October 2025, a 12-day Israel-Iran conflict halted after US pressure, tensions cooled, he says, between India and Pakistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Serbia and Kosovo, Egypt and Ethiopia, Thailand and Cambodia, and Rwanda and the DRC. 8 wars stopped on paper.
I settled 8 other wars, India, Pakistan. I settled other wars that were Vladimir Putin called me, Armenia, Azerbaijan. He said, I can't believe you settled that one. They were going on for 35 years. I settled it in one day. And President Putin called me. He said, you know, I can't believe I worked on that war for 10 years trying to settle it. I couldn't do it. I said, do me a favor, focus on settling your war. Don't worry about that one.
But here's the rub. Trump's peace claims are peaking only alongside rising US firepower. Pentagon records show over 600 US air and drone strikes in 2025 alone. Diplomacy in one hand, detonators in the other. And threading through it all, the Nobel Peace Prize. On social media, the president posted more than 6,500 times in his first year, averaging 18 posts a day. In bursts, he returned again and again to one theme. Why not me? In October 2025, he publicly fumed after the prize went to Venezuelan opposition leader Marcia Corina Machado. By January 2026, he posted a photo of Machado's physical Nobel medal gifted to him, calling it a wonderful gesture. 6 Nobel mentions in a single post, claims he deserved it 4 or 5 times. And a blunt message to Norway. Peace, he said, isn't free. One look on Trump's Truth Social account and you'll see his MAGA base and supporters seeing strength in his actions. Critics, on the other hand, only see more and more instability. 8 conflicts claimed as victories and a Nobel Prize that still hasn't arrived. The question now, is this peace by design or pressure building for the next explosion? With Arjun Samar Mahindran, Bureau Report, NDTV.
I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
The story goes far beyond the countries Donald Trump has attacked and the wars he has claimed to stop. Trump sent another signal from the dais at Davos, and Europe, well, it heard it loud and clear. First time since World War II, EU leaders are openly questioning whether the US is still on their side or now actually standing in their way. Donald Trump backed off on tariffs, yes, but his words on Greenland, calling it America's territory, landed like a lightning bolt across Europe. And leaders on the European continent are now thinking the statement that they have heard now is what they have to now decide whether the NATO still holds or not. 1949 is when NATO came into being. 1951 is when the Greenland Treaty and the agreement between the US and Greenland was signed with Denmark. Since then, what has changed now in 2026? Everybody sitting in Davos was asking that question. Every European leader on the continent is asking that question. But there are no answers because no one knows what Donald Trump is willing to do and how far is he willing to go. This is bigger than Trump. This is bigger than tariffs. It's the sound of an alliance that's quietly cracking with disbelief. Since 1951, it held true, and 1949. In fact, Article 5 of the treaty, which says attack on one is attack on all, was triggered by the US after 9/11. All NATO allies stepped in, supported America then, because war on terror was not just America's war, it was NATO's war. But now they're all thinking whether it was worth their while or not. To talk more on what exactly is Donald Trump thinking, and more importantly, can NATO survive what Donald Trump is doing right now to Greenland? To talk on that, Sarah Claire joins me on the broadcast. She's a professor, foreign policy commentator. Sarah, thanks much for speaking to me on Faultlines. The world, especially European leaders, are still trying to wrap their heads around what Donald Trump actually said in Davos. He said that he wants to start negotiations on Greenland at the very earliest. What negotiations can you actually have with a territory, with a country that doesn't belong to you?
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I would say, Trump's goal is really to strengthen NATO. And especially when it comes to Greenland, he sees that as a weak point. And so sometimes that can be uncomfortable, I think, for our European allies. And there are growing pains with NATO as it tries to adapt to 21st century with Russia and China, who are now near peer competitors. And so some changes will have to be made. And as far as Greenland, the negotiations, I believe today he actually announced that he discussed a framework deal with the Secretary General of NATO. So he does want to go about this in a diplomatic way. And he may use tariffs and different things like that if he needs to. But my hope and my take is that, hopefully NATO will come around to seeing how critical this really is for everybody.
Sarah, what happens in the eventuality that NATO says that Greenland doesn't belong to America and they are backing Greenlanders, they're backing the Danes completely? What happens to NATO? What happens to the US and European alliance, the transatlantic alliance?
Well, I think Trump said today in his speech that, if they don't agree with him on this, then he's not going to use force, but he will remember it. And I think what to take away from that is that he's talking about the U.S. spends a lot of money and a lot of military power defending Europe, and we do that without asking for much in return. And so we may choose, to lessen some of those security commitments and put them in other critical areas that are more critical to U.S. national interests and the Western Hemisphere and all those things that he's talked about. If Europe can't kind of be more reciprocal in the relationship. But I don't think it means that he wants to go to war with anybody.
No, he doesn't want to go to war, but he covets a territory that doesn't belong to him. He also talked about the fact that he used tariffs, and that's how a lot of his allies actually came back on the negotiating table. But many believe that the long arc of using tariffs for geopolitical goals has now been exhausted in his 1 year in office. The question is, are we then looking at the end of NATO during Donald Trump's second term?
Well, I don't think so. I think that his use of tariffs, he's actually talked about it, and he's said, it's been something that he's leaned on to kind of push through a lot of these peace deals that he's worked on. And these economic tools are something that he is very adept at, maybe more adept at than some other presidents who chose other tactics when they were trying to get a deal done. And so he's actually been able to lean on that in a way of pursuing peace rather than going to a forceful choice. And in terms of NATO surviving his term, I think President Trump actually wants to strengthen NATO. And the way he goes about it can be kind of abrasive, certainly, but I do believe that's his ultimate goal.
I'm glad that you're using the term abrasive when it comes to Donald Trump. That is most certainly the case, and he's really rubbed his European allies the wrong way. But let me ask you this final question, which is that when you talk about Donald Trump's 1 year in office, he's completed a year. He says he's a peace president. He should get a Nobel Peace Prize. He isn't getting one. But the fact is, here is an American president who's actually ordered more strikes than his predecessor. 600 plus strikes that we in fact documented right here on Faultlines. Your response to that?
Well, I would say I'm not surprised by that because his predecessor, President Biden, didn't do anything during his term at all in any foreign policy, domestic policy. He was basically absent. He
certainly did not get Maduro. You're right about that. And he most certainly didn't tell Greenland that this is a territory we were stupid enough to let go of. You're right about that. But Sarah, thanks much for joining me on this edition of Faultlines. Always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Well, viewers, if you really take off your blinkers and see how things are unfolding right now, it's hard to believe that Donald Trump has only finished a quarter of his term. Yes, he's only done 1 out of his 4 years. And his big focus going forward is now on Greenland. Greenland matters to Donald Trump for many reasons. But beyond the resources and the significance of the Arctic route, Greenland is key to proving that America is still the most powerful nation on earth. And Donald Trump is the most powerful president that America has seen in a long time, since Ronald Reagan. And unlike Venezuela, Europe can take heart from the fact that Donald Trump is willing to start negotiations. Which way they will go? Well, the Danes don't know, the Greenlanders don't know, even maybe people inside the Oval Office don't know. But here is what many do know, how it may end up unfolding. Before invading Greenland, assuming the talks do not progress at all, Trump may exit NATO. And his new organization, the Board of Peace, which was ostensibly created for rebuilding Gaza, could become the new umbrella multilateral organization, the new UN. He himself has said it. He envisages it. The new NATO even. So will it be the end of the old NATO, and will it be the beginning of a new organization that Donald Trump will spearhead and then take over his Greenland ambitions? Well, we'll have to wait and watch out for as to how this unfolds. Well, viewers, on that note, slipping into a very short break, we come back on the other side and tell you more about why the Chinese recce drone that briefly entered Taiwan is causing huge uncertainty in the entire Taiwan Strait. Stay with us, we get you that details. Now, a Chinese recce drone briefly entered the airspace above the Taiwan-controlled Pratas Islands at the northern edge of the South China Sea last week, prompting Taipei to condemn the move as both provocative and irresponsible. Democratically governed Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory, says it faces near daily military pressure from Beijing, including frequent drone activity, though direct violations of the Taiwanese airspace do remain rare. This report tells you why this is an attempt by the Chinese to wear Taiwanese down in the long-drawn process to get Taiwan. Take a look.
Chilling fest in the skies over Taiwan as China crosses a new red line, flying a high-altitude surveillance drone into Taiwan's airspace. Analysts say China's unprecedented action exposes a dangerous new vulnerability and sharpens the risk of escalation. Taipei says a WZ-7 soaring Dragon drone entered the sky above the Pratas Island for 4 tense minutes before radio warnings were sent. The drone flew far beyond the reach of Taiwan's air defenses at an altitude of nearly 18,000 meters, underlining what experts are describing as Beijing's growing technological edge. Pratas is a small but strategic atoll in the South China Sea, 420 kilometers from southern Taiwan. It lies directly along submarine routes that could prove crucial in any future conflict. Experts suggest China has found another soft spot. They can enter Taiwan's airspace with impunity, and if Taiwan shoots it down later, Beijing can of course shift the blame. China claims Taiwan as its territory and has never ruled out taking it by force. In recent years, China has intensified drills, patrols, and now drone operations, inching ever closer to Taiwan's outlying islands. The question is no longer whether China can test Taiwan's defenses, but how often it will do so and how low it may fly next.
2027 is expected to be the year when China will attempt an invasion on Taiwan, or at least that's been the stated objective for many years. Taiwan matters for Xi Jinping. From a unification objective to create near total domination of South China Sea. But here's a reason why these recce's that are happening right now are not an attack, because it's not so easy. Remember, we now live in times of asymmetric warfare. Ukraine doesn't even have a traditional naval fleet and managed to destroy Russia's fabled Black Sea fleet, all with the help of unmanned drones. That's the reason why China understands that any invasion of Taiwan is not so easy, because any invasion will be long detected and Chinese troops will be extremely vulnerable, will face huge losses even before they cross the entire strait. And then they will get on to fighting a land campaign on terrain that's totally unsuitable, making things even more difficult for the Chinese. So what you are seeing right now are efforts to wear the Taiwanese down, because the Chinese know in times of asymmetric warfare, their stated goal of 2027 invasion of Taiwan may not come through. And what could happen is many, many levels of losses that Xi Jinping cannot afford. Well, viewers, on that note, it's time out on this edition of Faultlines. Thanks so much for watching. We come back next week with yet another conflict, yet another story to tell you, to decode, and tell you the many layers and the many fault lines that exist around the world.